You're a leech. You can't stay after November bills." She said it slowly, like she wanted each word to cut deep. The clinking of silverware stopped. Even the children went quiet. My son lowered his eyes and kept chewing, pretending he hadn't heard his wife humiliate me at my own table. I sat there, my hands still around the gravy boat, the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon pie hanging heavy in the air. For a moment, I wasn't sitting at a Thanksgiving table. I was sitting in a courtroom where my worth was being measured against their comfort. Nobody spoke. Not one person. All those years I spent building that house, paying those bills, holding this family together, and not a single voice rose for me. Not even his. My son. I felt something inside me harden. Not rage. Not sadness, just quiet clarity. I set the gravy boat down slowly. I wiped my hands on the napkin like I was washing the last bit of respect I had for them off my skin. Then I looked at her. Not with anger, but with the kind of calm that scares people more than shouting ever could. "All right," I whispered. That was all I said. One word. But in my chest, I was already packing my bags. Because she didn't know it yet, but by tomorrow morning, everything she took for granted would be gone. And she'd finally understand the cost of the man she called a leech. Welcome back, my friends. It's good to have you here with me today. If you're new, I'm just an old man with a few stories etched into the lines on my face. Some of them hurt, some of them teach, and some change everything. And as you listen, I want you to think about this. Tell me in the comments, has anyone ever dismissed you because of your age, like your worth faded with the years? I read every word you leave here, because this space isn't just mine. It's ours. From the outside, we looked like a picture-perfect Thanksgiving family. The kind you see on cards, everyone smiling, passing plates, pretending life is soft and simple. My son Daniel sat at the head of the table like a man proud of his home. His wife, Claire, carved the turkey with that smile she wears when guests are watching. She's the kind of woman who makes everything look sweet, until you listen closely. That night, even her laughter felt sharp. My two grandkids sat across from me, more interested in their phones than the old man who used to build them tree houses. Their voices had grown louder these past few years. Mine, quieter. It happened slowly. One day you're the rock, the next you're the extra chair in the corner. To the neighbors, to friends, to anyone looking in from the outside, we were tight. Daniel was the devoted son who took his father in after my wife passed. Claire was the picture of a caring daughter-in-law. And I? Well, I was the quiet old man who should be grateful. But I saw what others didn't. The way her smile tightened when I asked for anything. The way Daniel avoided looking at me when bills came up. Little shifts in tone, little sighs at night. They loved me when I paid. They tolerated me when I was quiet. And now they were ready to decide I'd overstayed my welcome. When Claire's words hit me that night, they didn't just come out of nowhere. They landed on a lifetime. A lifetime of calloused hands, cold mornings, and long days building something for this family. I still remember the first day I walked onto the land where that house now stands. Back then, it was just a stretch of dirt and wild grass. My wife, Ellen, stood beside me with a folded letter in her pocket, the bank approval. We didn't have much, just a small savings account and bigger dreams. I worked double shifts at the plant. She cleaned houses. We stacked every dollar like bricks. And every nail I hammered into those walls felt like I was building a future that would keep our family safe long after I was gone. That house isn't just wood and paint. It's the only home my son ever knew. I watched him take his first steps on those kitchen tiles, the same ones where Claire stood tonight, looking down on me like I didn't belong. That's the part that cuts the deepest. Not the insult, not the coldness, but the fact that I built the very floor she stood on when she decided I was nothing but a burden. There's a drawer in my old room. Inside it sits that letter from the bank, edges soft from time, corners yellowing. I kept it all these years because it reminded me where this family started. It used to make me proud. Now it feels like a warning I ignored. Somewhere along the way, the home we built became a house that wasn't mine anymore. It didn't start with that big explosion at Thanksgiving dinner. It started weeks earlier with something small. That's how betrayal usually walks in, on quiet feet. I'd just finished fixing the loose handle on the front door, the kind of thing I'd done 100 times since moving in with them. I came back into the kitchen, still smelling of sawdust, and reached for a glass of water. Claire stood by the counter, talking to her friend on speakerphone. She didn't lower her voice when she said it. I swear, it's like having another bill in the house. I didn't marry into this to raise someone else's father. My fingers tightened around that glass. I didn't say a word. I just kept drinking, letting the cold water burn down my throat like it was trying to wash something heavy away. She glanced at me and smirked. Not a big one, just a corner of the mouth, like she was testing how far she could push. Daniel walked in a second later. She didn't even flinch. She just changed the subject, all sweet and soft like the woman everyone thought she was. He kissed her cheek, never realizing that she'd just cut me open with words sharp enough to bleed a man dry. I smiled too, a small, quiet smile that fooled them both. But inside, I tucked every word into a dark, careful corner of my mind. I knew I'd remember them, not out of spite, but because sometimes the quietest wounds are the ones that never really heal. After that first sting, things didn't explode right away. They never do. Betrayal likes to test the water before it burns it down. Every day after that felt like a new little push, soft enough to pass as nothing, sharp enough that I felt it like splinters under the skin. It started with dinner. I used to sit at the head of that table, the spot my wife used to call the captain's chair. One evening, I came down and found Claire already sitting there, legs crossed, glass of wine in hand. She didn't even look up. "Oh, I hope you don't mind," she said. Daniel likes when I sit close to him now. I didn't mind the chair, but I minded the look. The kind that tells you you're no longer the pillar of the house. You're the extra guest who's overstayed. Then came the property talk. It was after dinner one night, dishes still warm in the sink. I was in the living room when I heard them. Claire's voice was low, sweet, practiced. "You know, if we sold the house, we could finally get that place by the lake. He doesn't need all this space anyway. He's old." Daniel didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either. That silence was enough. That silence said everything. A week later, my bank card came back declined at the pharmacy. I'd never once been late on a bill. When I checked, I found withdrawals I hadn't made, transfers from the joint account, the one I opened to help them. I looked at the numbers on the screen, and I swear it felt colder than any winter wind. My name was on the money, but my hands were nowhere near it. And then, the whispers grew bolder. Claire started talking about boundaries, how this arrangement isn't sustainable. She made it sound practical, reasonable, almost polite. But her eyes said something else entirely. "You're in the way." I didn't react. I nodded when she spoke. I sat through dinners where they talked around me like I was furniture, and every time they crossed another line, I tucked it quietly into a growing list in the back of my mind. She thought silence meant weakness. She thought stillness meant surrender. She didn't know silence can also mean strategy. The thing about betrayal is it doesn't just arrive one day like a thunderstorm. It seeps in like a draft under the door. You don't always feel it at first, but the house gets colder without you realizing why. It started with whispers. Late at night, when they thought I was asleep, I'd hear them downstairs. Claire's voice always led the conversation. "He doesn't even check the accounts anymore," she whispered once. Another time, "We need to get the paperwork done before the end of the year." The way she said paperwork made my skin crawl. Then little things began to go missing. Not the big loud kind, but the quiet kind that only someone who built a life on numbers would notice. A bill in my name paid late. A savings transfer I didn't authorize. My own mail suddenly misplaced. When I asked, Daniel brushed it off. "It's nothing, Dad. Just a mix-up." But the look in his eyes wasn't confusion, it was fear. One afternoon, I walked into the living room and found a folder half tucked under a cushion. Legal papers, my name on the top corner. Words like title transfer, trust revision, and liability floated on the page like ghosts I'd been warned about too late. I set it back exactly how I found it. They didn't know I'd seen. That night, I lay in bed with the house quiet around me, staring at the ceiling. A part of me wanted to believe it was just bad timing. But another part, the part that had seen the way Claire's smile tightened when she said my name, already knew the truth. They weren't just waiting for me to leave. They were building a world where I didn't exist. I didn't react. Not yet. Instead, I started paying attention to everything they thought I was too old to notice. I didn't raise my voice. I just listened. And every whisper, every missing dollar, every paper they tried to keep from me, I stored it like evidence. It happened on a Tuesday night, the kind of quiet evening when the house creaks more than it breathes. Claire and Daniel thought I was already asleep in my room. What they never understood is that old men don't sleep as deeply as they used to. We listen. We notice. We survive on the things they think slip past us. I stepped out to get a glass of water, my steps soft on the hallway floor. That's when I heard Claire's voice, sharp, focused. Once he signs, it's ours. No more waiting. I froze. My heartbeat didn't race. It slowed. The kind of slow that happens right before a storm breaks. Are you sure he won't notice? Daniel asked, his voice low, nervous. He's old, Dan. He trusts you. Just get him to sign the transfer. Once the will is amended, everything goes straight to us. No delays, no court. My hand tightened around the glass, but I stayed still, hidden in the dark like a shadow in my own home. They had already written me out of the future I built for them. They didn't even whisper my name with love anymore. Just paperwork, property, numbers. Later, when they left the room, I walked in slowly. The folder they'd been hovering over was still on the coffee table. My name in bold letters. It wasn't just talk, it was real. A property transfer. The house I built with my own hands, the land I paid for, the future I once thought would stay in the family. I read every line. Then, I carefully folded the papers back exactly how I found them. But I didn't say a word. Not a sound. I just stood there in the dim light, my reflection caught in the glass frame on the wall. The old man they thought was weak, staring back at them with quiet fire in his eyes. I didn't confront them. I didn't call a lawyer that night. I simply tucked the moment away, like a blade sheathed and waiting. They thought they were playing a quiet game behind my back. What they didn't know was that I'd already started listening. And now, I held their proof in my hands. I stood there in that dark living room, holding their plans like a stranger reading my own obituary. Every word on that paper told me I'd been erased long before I even left. And the hardest part wasn't what they were planning to take. It was how easy they thought it would be, how sure they were that I wouldn't fight. So let me ask you something. What would you have done if you found proof like that? Would you have stormed into the room, slammed the papers on the table, and demanded answers? Or would you have stayed quiet, like I did, and let the silence do its work? Tell me in the comments. I want to know how you'd handle betrayal when it comes from the people who were supposed to protect you. Thanksgiving night wasn't supposed to be like this. It used to be my favorite holiday. The one time every year when everyone sat together, passed the gravy around, and remembered what family used to mean. But that night, I felt it the second I walked into the dining room. Something in the air had changed. Claire had set the table perfectly. Polished silverware, folded napkins, candles burning low. She loved control, loved looking like the woman who ran the perfect house. But beneath the warm lights, there was an edge. A storm that had been quietly building for months. I took my seat at the far end of the table, where I used to sit beside Ellen. That chair's been empty since the day she was buried, but I still sat there because some places hold pieces of your soul. Claire sat directly across from me, her back straight, hands resting on the table like she was waiting for her cue. Daniel sat beside her, quiet. Too quiet. He'd avoided my eyes all evening like a man who'd already chosen his side and couldn't face the man he betrayed. The conversation started soft, the grandkids talking about college plans. Claire laughing that fake, shiny laugh that made strangers love her and family fear her. I kept my eyes on my plate, listening to the rhythm of their voices like someone standing outside their own house. Then, out of nowhere, her tone sharpened. "We've been talking," she said, cutting through the room like a blade through cloth. Daniel's fork froze midair. "And," she continued, "this arrangement just isn't working anymore." My son swallowed hard, like the words were his, but she'd rehearsed them for him. "It's too much, Dad," Daniel added quietly. "The bills, the space, everything, it's just too much." She leaned forward. "We've given this a lot of thought. You can stay through November, but after that, we need to move forward with our lives. It's not personal." Not personal. Those two words rang through my chest like a hammer on steel. Not personal. In the house I built. In the chair I bought. On the floor I laid with my own hands. I looked at Daniel. He didn't look back. His shoulders were small, hunched, like a man who wanted forgiveness before he even finished the sin. Claire's eyes, on the other hand, burned cold. She wanted a reaction. She wanted me to yell, to crumble, to beg. That was her mistake. I didn't move. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I cut the turkey slowly, lifted the fork, took one bite, chewed. The silence around me grew thick, heavier than any words could have been. "Dad?" Daniel said, uneasy. I set my fork down gently, folded the napkin, and placed it on the table. My hands didn't shake, not even once. I let them sit there in the silence they'd created, let them taste the weight of it. Claire shifted in her chair first, because silence isn't weakness, it's a mirror. And what they saw in it wasn't me. It was themselves. "All right," I said quietly. One word. That's all they got. One word that held everything they didn't know was coming. Claire smiled like she'd won. Daniel exhaled like he'd escaped a war he didn't have the courage to fight. And I sat there, calm, silent, steady, a man they believed they'd cornered, not realizing they'd just opened the door I planned to walk through. I finished my plate, stood up, walked back to my room. I heard Claire whisper something smug to Daniel as I closed the door. But what she didn't see was my face on the other side of it. Not broken, not beaten, cold, focused, ready. The next morning, the house smelled of cold turkey and stale wine, the leftovers of a night that left more scars than smiles. Claire was at the kitchen counter, still in her robe, clutching a mug she didn't really drink from. Daniel sat slouched at the table, looking more like a shadow than a sun. He avoided my eyes, but I could feel the unease in the air. They thought the conversation at dinner had settled everything. They thought I'd retreat quietly, pack up my things, and disappear like a tired old man who finally got the hint. But when I walked into the kitchen, I wasn't the man they thought they'd cornered. I carried something with me. A folded envelope, plain, white, nothing special at first glance, but its weight was heavier than they knew. It was the kind of paper that doesn't bend to arrogance. I placed the envelope gently on the table, right between Daniel's untouched coffee and Claire's manicured fingers. The sound it made when it touched the wood was quiet, but it landed like a hammer in the room. Neither of them moved at first. Daniel finally asked, his voice a little too careful, "What's that?" "Just something I found," I said calmly. "Something with my name on it." Claire tried to play it cool, forcing that thin smile she uses when she wants to control the room. "You're being vague, Dad. What's inside?" "Oh," I said, tilting my head slightly. "Just something that reminds me whose name is on this house, whose signature built it, whose money paid for every wall standing around you." Her smile faltered for a second. Not gone, just cracked. I saw it. I let the silence stretch a little longer, watched her fingers tighten around her mug. "I think," I continued softly, "you two should be a little more careful with what you plan behind closed doors. You never know who might be awake." Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Dad, what are you talking about?" I gave him a long, measured look. Not angry, just tired. The kind of tired that carries years inside it. "You'll figure it out," I said. "Soon enough." I picked up the envelope and slid it back into my jacket pocket, like I was tucking a blade back into its sheath. Their eyes followed it the whole way. I didn't need to show them what was inside. Just letting them know I had it was enough to rattle the quiet kingdom they'd been building behind my back. Claire stood a little straighter, like someone trying to hold their ground while the earth shifted beneath them. Daniel finally looked at me, and for the first time in months there was fear in his eyes. I didn't say another word. I just walked past them, slow and steady. When I reached the hallway, I heard Claire whisper to him, her voice low but sharp. "He knows." I smiled to myself. "No," I thought, "you have no idea what I know. Not yet." They thought the envelope was everything. It wasn't. That was just the shadow. The real storm was still tucked away where they'd never think to look. A week after that dinner, I asked Daniel and Claire to meet me at the house one last time. No yelling, no threats. I told them I just wanted to talk things through. They showed up exactly as I expected, Claire walking 2 steps ahead, already wearing the smile she saved for people she thought she could manipulate. Daniel, pale and quiet, trailing behind like a man too weak to lead. We gathered in the living room. The same room where my wife and I once danced on cold winter nights. Now it felt like a courtroom. Claire crossed her arms, her eyes sharp. "So," she said, "have you made a decision about everything?" "I have," I replied softly, "but before I go, there's something you should both see." I reached into my jacket and placed a second envelope on the coffee table. Not the thin white one from before. This one was thick, heavy, official. Claire laughed, actually laughed, as if she couldn't imagine anything I had would matter. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she said. "You know you can't keep this place forever." "Oh," I replied, my voice steady, "I know exactly how long I can keep it." I slid the envelope toward them. Inside was a copy of the updated will, one they didn't know existed. 2 years earlier, after Ellen died, I'd met with my lawyer. Every asset, every dollar, every piece of property was moved into a living trust under my name alone. And in that trust, I'd built in one small, quiet clause. Any relative who tried to coerce, threaten, or manipulate me for my property would be legally removed from inheritance. Permanently. No appeals. Claire's laughter died as she scanned the first page. By the second, her hands started to shake. By the third, her face drained of every ounce of color. Daniel leaned over her shoulder, eyes widening as the words settled like stones in his chest. "What is this?" she whispered. "That," I said, leaning back in my chair, "is the cost of calling me a leech." But I wasn't done. From my other pocket, I pulled out a small voice recorder. One of those cheap black ones nobody notices anymore. I pressed play. Their whispers from that Tuesday night filled the room. Every word about the title transfer, the will, the plan to cut me out. Their own voices, clear, cold, calculating. Claire's hand flew to her mouth. Daniel stumbled back a step like the air had punched him. All that careful scheming, undone by the very arrogance that made them speak too loud in their own house. "You recorded us," Daniel breathed. "No," I said, calm and steady. "You recorded yourselves. I just pressed a button." Claire reached for the paper again, searching for some loophole that didn't exist. But it was all there. The proof, the recording, the clause, the trust, ironclad. "You're out," I said softly. "And when I walk out of here today, this house, every wall, every tile, every inch of land, goes with me. You get nothing." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Claire crumpled the edge of the will with trembling hands, but paper doesn't bend the law, and greed doesn't undo its own mess. Daniel finally sank into the couch like a man realizing too late what his silence had cost him. I stood slowly, buttoning my jacket. I didn't need to scream. Their faces were the victory. Their collapse was the noise. "Goodbye, kids," I said quietly. "You wanted me gone? Now it's your turn." And with that, I walked out of the house I built, not broken, not burdened, free. For a moment, no one moved. The only sound was the soft hum of the heater and the faint rustle of paper in Claire's trembling hands. All that fire she used to have, all those smug looks, were gone. Her lips parted like she wanted to speak, but no words came out. She had built her entire power on control, and I had just stripped it away with a single envelope and a recording. Daniel sat on the couch like a man hit by a slow-moving train. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even crying. He just stared at the floor, his shoulders caved in, like he was finally realizing what silence really costs. He hadn't called me dad that night at dinner. He hadn't defended me. And now the house he grew up in, the one he once ran barefoot through, was legally gone from his reach. Not because I took it from him, but because he let someone else take me down without lifting a finger. Claire clutched the papers like she could somehow rewrite them with her bare hands. Her face had gone pale, like all the color had been drained out. She looked small, smaller than she'd ever seemed, the kind of small that comes when arrogance finally meets a wall it can't climb. I didn't yell. I didn't say "I told you so." I just stood there and let the silence sit heavy between us. Because sometimes, justice doesn't need to be loud. Sometimes it's the quiet that breaks people. "This isn't fair," Claire finally whispered, her voice cracking like a dry branch. "Fair?" I said softly. "Fair was every day I stayed in this house. Fair was when I paid the bills, fixed the roof, helped raise your kids. Fair was the seat at that table you took from me. This isn't unfair, Claire. This is truth." Daniel finally lifted his eyes. For the first time in months, he really looked at me. There was guilt in that look. Shame. The kind of regret that arrives too late to fix anything. I didn't hate him. But I didn't owe him the world I built either. She dropped the papers onto the coffee table. They landed with a dull, final thud, like the sound of a door closing for good. And in that sound, the balance of everything shifted. I didn't have to push them out. Their own choices had already done the job. I buttoned my coat slowly. No rush, no need for dramatics. The truth was already doing the work. I walked toward the door while they sat there, pale, silent, broken by the very plan they thought would make them powerful. Truth doesn't need a stage. It doesn't scream. It just stands there, unshakable, until the lies crumble around it. You know, life has a way of teaching lessons without raising its voice. It doesn't always come through lightning bolts or loud arguments. Sometimes it comes through silence. A quiet kind of justice that doesn't need applause. I spent my life believing that loyalty held families together, that love meant something steady, something unshakable. I built a home with these hands, raised a boy who grew into a man, and trusted that what I gave would be remembered. But trust isn't a contract, and love without respect is just a house without a foundation. It looks strong until someone decides to kick it down. The truth is, people show you who they are not when you give them everything, but when they think you have nothing left to give. That's when you see who stands with you and who's just standing in your shadow. I didn't need to shout to make my point. I didn't need revenge soaked in anger. All I needed was the truth. And the truth, when held steady and quiet, has a way of leveling everything around it. If you're listening to this, I want you to remember something. Never let anyone convince you that your worth fades with age. Never let them turn your kindness into their entitlement. Respect isn't something you beg for. It's something you hold on to, even if it means standing alone. If you've stayed with me this far, thank you. I mean that. These stories aren't just about me. They're about all of us. The moments when life tests what we're made of and who stands beside us when it does. I told this story not to dwell on the pain, but to remind anyone listening that silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's strength, wearing patience like armor. I want to hear from you. Have you ever been pushed aside by people who once leaned on you? If it happened to you, would you have stayed silent like I did? Or would you have confronted them right away? Your words matter here, more than you know. If this story meant something to you, take a second to subscribe, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and check out the other stories waiting for you on this channel. Every story I tell carries a piece of something real, and maybe a piece of someone out there listening. Until next time, my friends, stay strong, stay wise, stay blessed.